Ever since they were little kids, twins June and Jennifer Gibbons refused to speak to anybody other than each other. They were disturbingly inseparable and seemed to use a private language that only they could understand. By the time the girls turned 18, they had committed numerous criminal offenses and were sent to a high-security mental hospital in 1981. Years before this, they apparently made a long-standing agreement that if one of them died, the other must begin to speak and live a normal life. After 12 years at the asylum, they decided it was time for one of them to die, and Jennifer agreed to make the sacrifice. In March of 1993, Jennifer was taken to the hospital where she soon died from a sudden inflammation of the heart. There was no evidence of poison or alcohol in her system. It was almost as if she just died out of nowhere. Afterwards, June said she was finally liberated from her sister and was eventually released from the hospital. She now speaks to others and has lived a relatively normal life ever since. Scientists once took a swab of the inside of an American man's belly button to observe the bacteria that lived there. They found some bacteria that only exists in Japan, even though the man had never been outside the US. This 1998 photo was taken in Omagh, Ireland, just minutes before a bomb placed in the red car exploded. 29 people were killed by the blast and another 200 plus were injured. The cameraman of this photo died, but the man and his daughter happened to survive. Josephine Myrtle was born with a rare genetic anomaly known as dipagus. Her body was completely normal down to the waist, but below it she had 2 pelvises and 4 legs. Despite her condition, she still managed to marry a doctor and have 5 children. In 1957, a stray dog named Laika became the first animal to ever orbit the Earth when she was placed inside the Soviet spacecraft Sputnik 2. The dog was originally reported to have died painlessly in orbit about a week after takeoff. But nearly 50 years later, it was revealed that she likely died from overheating and panic just a few hours after the mission started. In 2011, a 17-year-old boy jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge to impress his friends, but the boy miraculously survived with only minor bruising. The bodies of hypothermia victims are often found hidden in places such as closets, under the bed, or behind furniture. This is a primal evolutionary response called hide and die, which victims experience right before death. In summer of 1998, Australian truck driver Bill Morgan suffered a sudden heart attack and fell into a coma. He was declared dead for 14 minutes and doctors were just about to take him off life support when he suddenly woke up. To celebrate his miraculous survival, he bought some scratch-off tickets and won a car. When the news asked him to reenact the moment he won, he bought another scratch-off for the cameras and won the $250,000 jackpot. Here's a clip of that incredible moment.
With more good luck when we asked Bill to reenact buying his scratchy ticket.
I just won 250,000. I'm not joking.
You're not lying.
I just won 250,000. Please don't go.
You have to. Congratulations, Bill. Fantastic.
I think I'll have another heart attack.
Of all the atrocities committed during World War II, few compare to the gruesome experiments performed by Japan's Unit 731. It was a biological warfare research unit that conducted experiments on unwitting subjects who were usually prisoners of war. But as the war intensified, their trials became increasingly extreme. These are the graves of a Catholic woman and her Protestant husband who were not allowed to be buried together in 1888. In the 1960s, NASA was funding an experiment to try to teach humans how to communicate with dolphins. They hired a woman named Margaret Howe-Levatt, whose only credentials were that she loved animals, perhaps a little too much. She stayed in a flooded home with a male dolphin named Peter and practically lived with him for 6 days out of the week. Peter was a sexually maturing male dolphin, so Margaret often had to satisfy him to calm him down. This led to the formation of an intense emotional bond that was abruptly ended once the experiment was shut down. A heartbroken Peter struggled mightily with the separation and became deeply depressed. Ever since then, this experiment has been regarded as extremely unethical and weird as shit. On August 6, 1945, Tsutomu Yamaguchi was on business in Hiroshima when the first atomic bomb exploded. The blast ruptured his eardrums, blinded him temporarily, and left serious burns all over his body. 3 days later, he returned to his job in Nagasaki, and his coworkers called him crazy as he told the details of a single bomb destroying an entire city. Just a few hours later, the second atomic bomb was dropped nearby, wiping out most of Nagasaki, but Yamaguchi survived yet again. He's the only man who is officially recognized for surviving both nuclear explosions. During World War II, one of the first cities that the US planned on nuking was its former capital, Kyoto. The only reason it wasn't bombed was because US Secretary of War Henry Stimson spent his honeymoon there and thought it was a nice place. So instead of Kyoto, they decided to target the city of Kokura. But on the scheduled day of the bombing, it was too cloudy to view Kokura from the air. So the bomber pilot went for the secondary target, Nagasaki. You're 10 times more likely to be bitten by another person in New York City than you are to be bitten by a shark at any beach in the world. There's a section of Yellowstone where you could get away with murder due to a loophole in the US Constitution. The Zone of Death is a 50 square mile piece of Idaho that's completely uninhabited. This means if you commit a crime within this zone, there could be no jury because no one lives there and therefore no trial for the crime. A mysterious Coke machine in Seattle, Washington operated in the same spot for 20 years. The buttons were labeled mystery and dispensed a rare or even discontinued soda product when pressed. No one ever claimed to see anyone stocking the machine, and it disappeared in 2018 without a trace. Anonychia is the absence of one or more nails on the fingers or toes. In extremely rare cases like this one, the patient may be missing all of their nails. The broken specter is a natural phenomenon that only occurs under certain conditions. It happens when a person standing at high altitude sees their shadow casted onto a cloud below. In 1978, Soviet geologists found a family of 6 surviving in the middle of the Siberian wilderness. They'd been living in total isolation for more than 40 years and were completely unaware that World War II had even happened. In the year 2000, Rick Norsegian was looking for a barber chair at a California garage sale but ended up purchasing 2 boxes of old photos for $45. 4 years later, he discovered that the boxes contained 65 glass plate negatives from legendary photographer Ansel Adams, worth right around $200 million. This ship's crew raised its anchor only to realize it was hooked on an unexploded torpedo. In 2020, a fan drove 3 hours to deliver a much-needed dose of insulin to rapper Boozy Badass. He wanted to compensate her, but she refused to take any payment other than a photo with him. On her way home, she stopped at a gas station, bought a scratch-off ticket, and won $10,000. After Martin Luther King was killed in 1968, his funeral was held at Morehouse College in Atlanta. A small group of students were randomly selected to be ushers for the funeral, and one of them was Samuel L. Jackson. In 1950, a Nebraska church exploded 5 minutes after choir practice was supposed to start. But miraculously, all 15 members of the choir were late that day for different reasons, and not a single person was injured. Violet Jessop was a ship nurse in the early 1900s who couldn't seem to avoid disaster. She was on the Titanic when it sank, the Britannic when it was struck by a torpedo, and the Olympic when it collided with another ship. Violet amazingly survived all 3.